Hi, my name is Steve Eady. I'm with the Sauk Valley Voter Education Fair. We're actually at the fair today, and we're interviewing candidates. And with me is Patrick Hughes. He's running for U.S. Senate on the Republican seat.
Correct.
And we've got a list of questions. To be in all fairness to him, he just saw them a few minutes ago, but most of the other candidates saw him in advance, so they had a chance to prepare. So I'm just going to start right off and ask you the first question. I want to talk a little bit about your thoughts on spending in Washington and what's going on with the spending and where are we at.
Well, first of all, Steve, thanks for having me. And
Sure.
of course, thanks. This is a great event. Anytime you get the voters together and inform them on choices, I think that's terrific. Just the other night, we had a debate on ABC News, and my main opponent, Mark Kirk, decided not to show up and face the voters. So I think this is a great event, allowing people to see us. Washington spending is obviously out of control, and the Obama administration is doing exactly the wrong thing. They passed a stimulus that was supposed to prevent us from going to 8% unemployment. Now we're at 10, and in this state we're at 11. I would have done something very different. I would have sent a message to the business community and capital investors of all kinds by cutting capital investment taxes, capital gains taxes. And if we had done that, either cut them or frozen them for a period of 2 years or cut them for a period of 5, you'd have seen capital get off the sidelines and people investing in the economy. We need to send a message to the folks that the private business people, private equity, stock buyers need to get off the sidelines and invest, and that's how we would have helped get ourselves out of the recession. We've got to cut spending in Washington. We've got to defeat this monstrosity health care bill. Cap and trade, which Mark Kirk voted for, largest tax in history, largest government expansion since the New Deal. And in our state, which is an industrial Midwest agricultural manufacturing state, it'll wipe us out. So yeah, I mean, I'm against the spending. We need to cut it. When I get to Washington, D.C., we'll start looking at ways to balance our budget and grow our economy.
Well, let's throw a few ideas out and get your opinions on. The first one is, would you be in favor of any sort of legislation that would actually cap federal spending, such as tie it to GDP or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I am in favor of that. You've seen them many times being proposed. It's the percentage of inflation, right. Capped to the growth rate of the population. Right. And I think that's a good way to approach it. But we need to figure out, that's one way to do it. We need to figure out ways to make the folks in Congress and senators who aren't, like I am, a fiscal conservative, and aren't going to police themselves. We need to have a way to stop them from spending money that we don't have, right. And raiding other funds to pay for general operating expenditures, et cetera, like they do with Medicare and Social Security and everything else.
Well, I think part of the issue is, and I guess I'll just divert a little bit off script, talk about, because we are at over $100 trillion in unfunded mandates, and the biggest budget items we have on there, which actually goes to the second question here, is actually social programs. Social Security, Medicaid, and defense are the big three, the big trifecta up there, and actually 4 is interest on our deficit.
It's interest on deficit. You've got the 4 right.
So
You're
right. Let's talk about healthcare first. What's your thoughts on healthcare? What do you think about what's gone through now? And what would you propose that would be similar or different to what's going on in Washington?
Well, you made a great point about the structural debt and deficit we have on our entitlements that we already have in place. Right. And now we're talking about adding new entitlements. Right. The health care bill is a $1 trillion monstrosity. It's a great expansion of government that is a disaster, and it shouldn't happen. There are ways to fix our healthcare system. We have the best healthcare system in the world. The problem, Steve, is that it's too costly for folks on a day-to-day basis, and it also is too costly so people can't get access to it. And that's why you see so many people who don't have health insurance. Some of it's because they choose not to, and some of it's because it's too expensive. So we need to drive costs down. 3 ways off the bat we can do it. Okay. Allow us to buy insurance across state lines. If my policy in Idaho is half the cost in Illinois, let me buy it in Idaho. The problem is there's too many special interests keeping the oligopoly in place in states on insurance. California has 6 insurance companies where you can buy health insurance. 6. And because there's no competition across the country, those 6 can control prices more than they would if it was opened up to the entire nation. So that would drive costs down. Eliminate mandates. Stop telling people what insurance they have to buy. This is America. We should be able to choose what coverage we have and what coverage we want. If you're a young person and you only want catastrophic care and you'll pay a gigantic deductible if something happens to you, and that'll drive your premiums down to cover you for some other for those things, I think you should be able to do that if you're not interested in going in and having coverage at doctor visits and things like that. So that's another way. And of course, tort reform. Tort reform is a huge one. 16% of our healthcare budget goes to the problem with doctors practicing defensive medicine. The reason they're doing that is because they're being sued. Their malpractice premiums are going up because there aren't caps on what are called non-economic damages. So we need to cap non-economic damages, serious tort reform. You do those three things, cost will go down. As a consequence, accessibility will go up, and our great healthcare system will become more affordable, which is really the issue. But certainly the Obamacare plan is a mistake.
Yeah, and not to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you're basically telling the government to get out of the way more than anything. And you know, for example, you mentioned purchasing insurance across state lines. I believe it was Harry Truman in a Democratic Congress in 1946 that put that into place. That's 50 years ago or so, and people don't realize that sometimes it's actually the government forces that essentially nudges the market into a certain direction, and we've kind of done that, as well as Richard Nixon and Tip O'Neill in '72, creating essentially what we have in HMOs today of dominating the scene. In HMOs, they put legislation favorable. So you're basically saying the opposite. You're saying we've put too much meddling now. Let's pull some back, allow the free market to.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is American democracy, and American democracy is a capitalist society. When folks are allowed to make decisions for themselves, and those millions and millions and millions and millions of decisions are made, it gets us to our most efficient state. Now, that's not to say that government should be completely out of the lives of the American people. There is a role for government. I think it should be much more limited than it is now. Certainly, it should be limited from expanding government-controlled health care to the entire country. So I agree with that.
And I guess one last thing on that, and that's with what some of the people in the state of Illinois don't know is that the mandates that actually put on Illinois, because you know Medicaid, and for the Illinois, this is not what you're running for, but in the Illinois budget, the largest line item is actually Medicaid, and the federal government's health care program has actually put more burden on states picking up more of that when this health care goes through.
And imagine, see, for us, we have no money in the state coffers as it
Exactly.
is. And the reason we don't is because Governor Quinn and the Democrats have ties to the SEIU. They won't move Medicaid to a managed care program, which will save us $2.2 billion. Right. Governor Blagojevich raised the accessibility for Medicaid to 185% above poverty level. Right. These are all huge mistakes designed to get and consolidate political power that has given us structural deficits. What's their response? Let's raise taxes. That's what the Democrats always want to do. That'll only hurt us even more. We raise taxes, and I fought a tax increase heavily this year that Governor Quinn proposed. If we raise taxes in this environment, it is really going to cause even more trouble than we were at before. We need to get our spending under control in the state and nationally.
Okay, great. I want to switch a little bit to
Sure.
energy independence or dependence, as the case may be. I want to get your thoughts on where you stand on cap and trade. And I want to also, and this is something because you didn't have a chance to research before this, I'm going to explain this next one a little bit to you. It was an article, there's a Dr. Lindsay and Choi from MIT. They put out a paper in one of the geology magazines in 2009, peer-reviewed study that essentially proved all the UN models wrong. The UN models essentially say that the Earth is going to get warmer because global CO2 gases and other greenhouse gases are going to trap heat in, causing a greenhouse effect. And what this study did was took 20 years of data that they just released and showed that no, indeed, when the Earth warmed in the 90s, it actually dissipated more heat out into outer space as a percentage of the heat growth. So in other words, it was the opposite of every UN model that said it's going to be less ability to heat. So between all this stuff, I want to get your thoughts on that study, now that I've kind of given you an overview.
Sure,
on it.
no, that's good.
Cap and trade. And honestly, I want to get to the brass tacks here. Do you believe CO2 is a pollutant or not? So those are the three things I'd like you to cover, and what your proposal is to help release some of the natural resources the state of Illinois has.
Sure. Great series of questions. First, cap and trade. Largest tax in American history, largest transfer of power from the individual to the government since the New Deal policies. And in our state, an agricultural, Midwest, manufacturing, oil-producing, coal-producing state, it will wipe us out. We're at 11% unemployment. We will long for the days of 11% unemployment if cap and trade passes in our state, because our economy is based on those factors in such significant ways. Also, if greenhouse gas emission or carbon emission caused global warming that was going to be catastrophic, let's just for a second presume that the left is correct with respect to that. Cap and trade isn't going to do anything to help that out, because India and China aren't going to sign on to cap and trade. And so the impact that it's supposed to have with respect to that will never happen. It's a giant power grab. It'll cost us $9.8 trillion in GDP over time. It'll raise the taxes on every American, particularly poor Americans, on their energy costs, on the cost of goods, and it'll wipe American business out. Manufacturers will leave our country and go overseas. And my opponent, Congressman Mark Kirk, who again didn't debate me the other night, is in favor of cap and trade. He voted for it this year. He's one of only 8 Republicans, the only Midwest Republican to do it. 44 Democrats opposed it. So I'm opposed to that bill. With respect to greenhouse gas emissions and global warming, I haven't studied a lot of the science, but my understanding of it is this, that the Earth has warmed over a period of the last 100 years